Huie was primarily known as a landscape painter. In his earlier works, he painted according to the preconceived notions of what things should look like. For example, if he painted a tree at this time, he would paint it according to what aligned in his mental image or notion of a tree. It was considered a naivety and innocence to work in such a fashion. However, this mode that was so characteristic of the Jamaican intuitives can also be considered a restraint because it was predicated upon the artist being entirely untouched by any outside influences. Although it was assumed that Jamaican landscape has always looked as it does today, colonialism vastly changed the appearance of the land. The Poinciana trees beloved by Huie and depicted in his Golden Poinciana, Plate 6, are not native to the Caribbean. The jacaranda on the island that Huie also loves are non-endemic to Jamaica, but originated from Madagascar. Huie's paintings are never heavy in atmosphere. He creates landscapes from a flicking motion of his brush. Doing this, he captures the way tropical light reflects on everything. He often depicts glimpses of the sea in many of his Jamaican views. Another key component of Huie's work is his depiction of the sky. He captures the changing weather of the environment, from clouds hitting the mountains and storming, or rising mist on the sea's horizon. In general, Huie's landscapes either evoke a particular mood, such as studying poincianas in bloom, or mountain views with lush vegetation, or topographical views that are treated almost like portraits of the land. Because of such intimate and portrait-like treatment of the landscapes, his work is not simply categorized as impressionist. He paints colors into the neutral surfaces of the sand or road or wall to reflect the colors of surrounding objects. The term impressionists can be derogatory when applied to a contemporary artist because it implies that the artist has not kept up with the times, but is using techniques that were cutting edge a long time ago, and therefore not sufficiently modern. Biographer Edward Lucy Smith relays that several Jamaican artists use their work to perpetuate a myth of Africanism while having little or no direct experience with Africa itself. Instead, they look to books on African art written by European and American scholars, or to what is seen in Western museums. The interpretation of African tribal art in Western museums is often seen through a Picasso-era perspective that believed that such objects were magical objects rather than trying to see the land through an African perspective. Huie realizes there is no tradition of landscape painting historically in Africa, but only an Oriental or Western tradition, and instead portrays it through his own eyes, with a focus on Jamaican culture and Jamaican landscape. His landscapes try to reflect a microcosm of Jamaican life, and even feature inhabitants and small towns in which they reside, such as Falmouth. Some of his landscapes even show his nostalgia and experiences of his childhood reflected through his present gaze. This is what gives his landscapes a pastoral feel. His paintings are spontaneous in production rather than a result of a calculated musing on a subject or space, and reflects a much more personal relationship and capturing of the subjects and places. Huie's work was widely loved. For example, the Sunday Gleaner on July 24th of 1960 hailed his composition of early morning as carefully balanced with subtle planes that create a harmonious rhythm, The Gleaner described that his mellow colors applied in small particles produce vibrant textures of great beauty. They praised his work as a portraitist and his insight into his sitters. The writer relayed that he portrayed work objectively rather than in a mode that is swayed by what is in vogue. Edward Lucy Smith describes that Huie's work and career stand in the middle of current debates about colonialism, indigenism, and modernism as factors in the development of Afro-Caribbean art. Huie grew up in Falmouth and later arrived in Kingston in 1936, around the time when the Jamaican art movement for independence was occurring. Orators would gather in what was then known as Victoria Park. He started as a craftsman and worked as a professional china painter, and embellished these imports that were arriving from Germany. He was self-taught and was later classified as an intuitive painter in Jamaican art criticism. In his early start, he was commissioned by his cousin to do paintings that recorded the world around him. These paintings captured speakers in Victoria Park and well-dressed people he saw dancing at a club one early Christmas morning. He worked with on-hand materials such as house paint and pigments mixed with kerosene. In 1937, he took some of his work to the Institute of Jamaica and showed it to the secretary of the organization, H.D. Molesworth. Molesworth became a crucial person in his artistic career. Molesworth was charged with developing Jamaica's arts and culture. He arranged for Huie to take art lessons under Englishman Bartlett and commissioned Huie to construct a painting of his wife. This was Huie's first introduction to paint in tubes. Huie began winning awards in local art shows. He won a scholarship to study under Jamaican artist Corin der Harushian, and then continued his studies under Lorna Nichols when Corin left the island. In 1939, one of Huie's paintings was shown in the New York's World Fair. His portrait commissions began to grow in numbers and augmented the money he had gained from china painting. And he was eventually drawn into the elite social sphere of Edna Manley, who was the founder of Jamaica's National School of Art. Molesworth was able to introduce Huie to the famed Manleys because they were neighbors. The Manleys' property became the subject of Huie's first landscape painting. With the aid of the British Council, Huie went to Canada in 1944 to continue his studies. Two of his teachers were J.E.H. MacDonald and Frank Carmichael, who were founding members in 1920 of the Group of Seven, which was a group of modernists within Canada's art scene. This group was primarily focused upon landscape, which greatly impressed upon Huie. Huie attained such a great success that he was offered Canadian citizenship, but instead set out for England. The Jamaican government sponsored a joint exhibition of his work at Foyle's Gallery in London. This allowed him to gain publicity in The Studio, which was Britain's leading art journal at the time. He obtained a British Council scholarship, which allowed him to study at the Leicester College of Art. However, this was pretty small for him, and he later moved to the Camberwell School of Art in London through his connection with Molesworth, who at the time was then a curator at the Victoria and Albert Museum in England. He studied under Claude Rogers and Victor Pasmore, who were both founding members of the Euston Road School. Huie learned from his teachers and from witnessing the exhibitions of canonical artists such as Van Gogh.